Hi guys, welcome back to Swordwind. We are the Charlotte branch of the New York Historical Fencing Association. My name is Eric Lowe, and in this video we're going to be discussing the Guard of Alber. To begin with, the guard looks like this. So you'll see here, I have my point on or very near the ground. The sword is in my center line. My hands are below my natural waist, and I am threatening my opponent most immediately with my edge. Alber means fool, and there is debate even within the historical sources as to whether that means fool as in a literally stupid person or something else like fool as in a court jester, for instance. As a historical matter, what that means is that there will always be debate about what this guard sort of really, what this name sort of really means. As a pedagogical matter, I recommend thinking of Alber not in the sense of somebody who is stupid, but in the sense of a court jester, somebody who is a trickster, who can do things that other people aren't allowed to do, um, do things that are unexpected. This is a guard that, because the blade is is very low, sort of seems to leave yourself open, but can quickly present a threat in ways that you might not expect. You can lever up on the pommel to quickly present a point to an opponent who rushes in. Uh, Side note, here's another example where grabbing the pommel and actually using this lever action is thoroughly appropriate. You can use Alber to take a step offline as somebody cuts at you and make a rising false edge cut to their hands, um, and other you know, sort of tricksy sorts of devices like that. The in terms of kind of the Wehrversetzen definitions, you can think of Alber as any time that the hands are below the natural waist and you're threatening the opponent with the edge. That means, in that sense, and I want to emphasize we're using that sense specifically right now. That means this is Alber, this is Alber, this is Alber, this is Alber, and that's let me be extra clear here. That is not saying that all of those guards or variations can do exactly the same thing. The stuff you can do from here, or from here, or back here in Nebenhut are not at all. There are some similarities, obviously, but these are not at all equal guards from the standpoint of somebody holding them. From the standpoint of somebody facing them, however, anytime the hands are below the waist and your opponent is threatening you with the edge, you can shorten your decision loop by saying, okay, what do I know about fighting Alber? I'm just going to apply that. If you happen to know more about the guard you're facing and kind of what it can and can't do, then great. If you don't, then lumping all of those guards into Alber is a way to kind of give you a quick and dirty plan of action to keep going. So let's talk about now kind of how Alber can go wrong. Both Suda von Danzig and Ringek talk about holding Alber with the right foot forward, the arms outstretched, and the point on the ground. Now, presumably they don't mean literally the point dragging on the ground. That would be very immobile and also not particularly good for your point. So we're talking about kind of point down towards the ground, and that would be in contrast to, for instance, something like this, which is basically kind of a bastardized version of long point. If you want to hold long point and actually threaten your opponent with the point, then that's fine. If you want to hold your sword in this deceptively open position, then that's fine too. But this doesn't threaten the opponent's face, doesn't have the kind of deceptiveness of point towards the ground. So I would say that although, although this is also probably not something you should rush in on, it's sort of between guards and not as useful as it could be. They talked about outstretched arms. Now, in my opinion, that means outstretched arms basically as I am demonstrating here. Not kind of really outstretched arms like this. This kind of breaks my body structure here. My head is offered to my opponent. My arms are very much offered to my opponent. I can absolutely see doing this as a kind of sort of an extra bad looking Alber to bait an opponent. I don't recommend practicing it as your prototypical Alber. The one thing that the outstretched arms does mean, I think, is for one thing, you're not point on the ground with sort of, as you might be in shrine cut here, with your arms much closer to your body. And it also certainly means you're not doing this. For one thing, this kind of, if I hike my arms up here, this sort of puts tension in my shoulders, so they're going to be less, my upper arms are going to be less quick to move. For another, this is sort of needlessly tiring to hold. So outstretched arms meaning kind of nice and loose and comfortable down towards the ground, but not offering your arms to your opponent unless you have a particular plan of action. You'll notice also I am maintaining my default cutting grip here. The reason for that is because as an edge-threatening guard, I should be able to cut. From Alber. Now, one of the subtleties there is that because I need to accelerate my tip up, my finger squeeze is reversed. Right now I am holding on mostly with my bottom fingers, so that when I squeeze my top fingers, they lever the point of the sword up and start that acceleration. If I were to hold mostly with my bottom fingers, as we normally do, then the only finger squeeze I could do would be move my point down, which is not a useful direction. So all of the things that all of the ways your default cutting grip can go wrong apply here, right? Levering, kind of rolling the wrists out to the side, or holding too much in a hammer grip. Especially in Alber, I think it's easy to maintain your heel of the palm contact here, because gravity wants to pull the sword in that direction anyway. Now, that being the case, remember not to over-pronate the wrists. This has extended arms, and my point is on the ground, but my wrist structure here is not really in a good position to cut. Now let's talk about variations. Pseudo von Danzig and Ringix both specifically say hold Alber with the right foot forward, and they don't offer any text or images suggesting that you can hold this with the left foot forward. They don't what they don't specify is kind of where exactly in the arc of before you, which is the only term they use, the point should be. So this is my point before me. This is also, my point is very clearly in front of me. The Nuremberg House book does say that you can hold this guard to either side, however. 3227A actually calls this guard Flug, and you can kind of see why. I have a bladed piece of steel pointed towards the ground, very much like a plow blade. So I take that as license to adopt this as sort of a variant, a left Alber, if you will. The advantage of this is that just like Nebenhut on this side, and you'll notice that my body position doesn't really change, it's just how I'm holding the sword. I can make an Unterhau, in this case with my short edge, that crosses my body like this. And that has, as Ringix goes into detail in his appendix, this has all sorts of useful defensive applications that just this would not. So these kind of a side Alber, a left Alber in particular, sets you up very nicely for these striking actions. Ringek specifically recommends that you execute your striking plays from the left, but the Nuremberg House book does point out that you can adopt what it calls Flug here to both sides. So we have a right Alber, a center Alber, and a left Alber. In terms of the difference between left and right Alber, aside from the fact that your strike can obviously come from different directions and cross your body in different ways, is that they load us an oblique step differently. If my right foot is forward, as it is in sort of kind of what I think of as the really default prototypical Alber, then my ability to move right is fairly constrained. My ability to move left, however, is quite free. Similarly, if I have my left foot forward, whether it's in a right Alber or kind of a switched foot center Alber, my ability to move left is constrained, but my ability to move right is not. So, which of those you might want to adopt depends on where you plan to move and where you think your opponent's going to move, how you want to oppose or avoid their sword. But this, and this, I think all have a decent pedigree for early Lichtenauer. Now this, with a left foot forward and the sword in front of you, is not something that you see in the early sources. It is something you see in Meyer's late 16th century book. He specifically says you should hold Alber with the left foot forward. Now, from the perspective of early Lichtenauer specifically, it's hard to make too much of a case for this. As a practical matter, I don't think this is some kind of great corruption of early Lichtenauer purity, and it has the exact same advantages that this has, only it allows you to move in a different way. So before we go, let me demonstrate those side Albers in the round. Here we are on the left. And on the right. One more thing before we go, you'll notice that even in the side Albers, my sword is in line with the center line of my torso. My belly button is still pointed at this point between my hands, and the sword projects in that direction. Basically, this is the end of a nice diagonal Oberhau. The reason for that is that this is not just kind of a deceptive, sudden thrust in your face guard. You should be able to cut from here, and this, as opposed to kind of like, for instance, holding Alber in sort of a boar's tooth kind of guard, keeps my blade already lined up for a nice cut. So I hope that's been useful. We will see you next week with another video.